Hi everybody, I'm Sarah, I'm the Real Simple Mama, and welcome to my kitchen. Ta-da, that's it. What we're gonna do today is talk all about handling and storing and selling fresh chicken eggs. So if you've got chickens or you're thinking about getting them, maybe you buy them from a neighbor, I'm gonna give you all of the tips on how to handle them, a couple of little hacks, and just some random information to help you when you're dealing with fresh chicken eggs in your kitchen. So firstly, let's talk a little bit about biology. So any chicken, regardless of the breed or the size or whether they're wild or domestic or whatever the case may be, when they lay their egg, it comes with what we call a bloom. And that's essentially like a special covering or a coating, you can't see it, that's on the shell that helps protect the egg. It's sort of like the chicken version of vernix when a newborn human is when they're born. They have like this coating on them. On a baby, it almost looks like cottage cheese, but it's like antibacterial, antimicrobial. It's to protect the baby. So the equivalent of that on a chicken egg is called the bloom. When you buy eggs from the store that have to be refrigerated, it is because they have been washed. Once an egg is washed and that bloom is washed off, the eggs have to be refrigerated and their shelf life is a little bit shorter. So if you buy eggs from the store or if you just choose to wash your fresh chicken eggs, you totally can. But once they're washed, two things: they have to be refrigerated and they're probably going to last for 2 more weeks. If you choose to keep them on the counter, as long as they're room temperature, so like I wouldn't put them right next to your burner or on top of your oven or anything, but if you keep them out on the counter, they're good for upwards of 3 or 4 weeks, as long as you're cool with them not being washed. I don't mind, obviously, I don't mind them not being washed. I do wash my hands after I handle those eggs, but I've got a couple of other tips we'll talk about as well. This thing I got, just so you know, I got it on Amazon. I call it my egg carousel. It holds over 20 eggs. Probably more than 24, I think. Now, my eggs are not the same size as like the extra large ones you buy at the store, but remember, those chickens probably have not had a very good life. And so I'm cool with my girls' eggs being a little bit smaller because they are free range and they're happy. The yolks are brighter, they taste a lot better. Anyway, so this is an egg carousel. The most important thing I would say when you're storing eggs is you can either write the date on them or you can have them in some sort of order so you know which one is oldest, and you want to eat the oldest ones first. So of course with this system, the oldest one is the one down there on the bottom. When I bring new eggs in, they go here on the top and they cycle. When you're storing eggs, and this is something that the grocery stores are not good about doing, when you are storing your egg, you need to store it with the pointy side down. That's the only thing that can get frustrating about this is as the eggs go around through their carousel, and I've only had one break out of 2 years, out of all the hundreds of eggs I've gotten, I've only had one break, and it was my fault. But you want to make sure that the egg is stored, like most of these are, pointy side down. So like I said, you can write the date on them, or you can use an egg carton on the counter, or whatever the case may be. But as long as they're unwashed, then you're good to go. The other thing you'll notice on some of my eggs is I have, this one's got pine shavings stuck to it. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of poop on an egg. If that grosses you out, again, you can wash them, but then you've got to refrigerate them. You have to remember that chickens only have one orifice without getting too crude. So where they poop and where they lay eggs and where they mate with a rooster is all the same. It's called the vent or the cloaca. So sometimes you will get a little bit of residue or a little bit of something you can see on the egg. You can still eat it. It's totally fine. So what I do when I'm cooking my eggs is I grab, one from the bottom, I crack it into the pan, I put the shell here, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then after I'm done, making sure all the eggs are moved down and all of that stuff, and I'm done touching the eggs, then I just wash my hands. Other than that, I've never gotten sick. I don't feel like it's gross or weird or anything like that. To me, again, I like having my fresh eggs. They taste so much better. So now let's talk about the shells. There are tons of things that you can do with fresh eggshells, and I did this in a video a really long time ago about the cheapest, easiest way to give calcium back to your chickens. But you can do different things with their shells. Do not do this with just the standard eggs from the store. Those birds are not given nearly as good of a diet as far as them being able to get sunshine, them being out in the grass and stuff like that. So I do not give any store-bought eggs. If I have to use those for anything, I don't give any of those shells back to my girls because I don't know what those birds were given. I don't trust that industry, to be honest. But this is my pan with my fresh chicken eggshells. So I crack them in the pan or whatever I'm doing, and I put the shells here. You want to let them dry either in air, and they'll be totally dry. The residue in there of the white and the yolk, all that stuff will be dried out within 24 hours. Or some people just leave the halves, and then when they have a tray full, they like pop them in the oven. I can't tell you what temperature or for how long to do that. I'm sure it's not very long. Then you can do a couple of things. The first thing you can do, if you want to crush it up, and you'll have to experiment with your birds on how fine you want it to be. I do it finer than this. These pieces are still pretty big. You could crush it all the way down to a powder. You could put it in your blender. You could use like a handheld food processor. There's a whole bunch of things you can do and give it back to your chickens. Just like with humans, chickens need the calcium for the shell first. Just like for a human mother, if she's pregnant, her body needs the calcium for the baby first. So if the mom's not taking enough calcium, then a lot of times her body will start taking it out of her bones to give to the baby. Sort of like the baby becomes the priority. So you want to make sure that your chickens are getting enough calcium, and you can tell that by the strength of their shells. And I have other videos if you're like, why am I getting soft shell eggs? You know, like you barely touch it and it cracks. So what I like to do is give the calcium back to the chickens. Their body used it to give them strong shells. Now I'm going to give the strong shells back to them. They may eat it if it's crushed up really fine in tiny little pieces. You may need to make it like into more of a powder. Then you can mix the powder with water and make it kind of a mash. You can put it in with their food. You can leave it separate. It's kind of up to you and what works for your chickens. But that's just a really neat way to get the calcium back. Other things you could do with the eggshells, the other main thing is if you leave a piece like this, if you're a gardener, or if you want to be a gardener, put a little bit of potting soil in here and start your seedlings in these shells. Any kind of seed that you want to start indoors, outdoors, it doesn't matter. I would be careful about leaving these outdoors because if you've got any kind of critters around, sometimes they'll take it and they'll eat it. But what you can do is you start the seedling in here, and then once it's sprouted and it's ready to be planted in the ground, leave it in the shell and plant it in the ground like that. The roots will use the calcium and the other nutrients that are in the shell. And I mean, as the plant gets stronger, it'll break the shell, and that shell will just be part of the ground, sort of like a fertilizer. It's really cool. So that's another thing you can do. Okay, if you bring in a fresh egg and for whatever reason it breaks on you, or like I picked up one the other day and somebody had either stepped on it by accident or pecked it, it had like one perfect little tiny hole in it. For me, I don't want to try cooking and eating that egg because, maybe it had been open just for 5 minutes, maybe it had been a few hours. So the egg is still kind of usable. And if you're like me and you're cheap and you're like, but I don't want to throw it away, cook it and give it back to your chickens. Your chickens can eat eggs. Technically, your chickens are omnivores. They can eat meat as well. It's not recommended on a normal basis, but out in the wild, sometimes roosters or hens will eat a chick that they know there's something wrong with it or whatever the case may be. The thing is, you don't want your chickens to realize that they're eating their own eggs. So you don't want to give them an egg like this, or, they break an egg and you just throw it for them, because then they'll start to figure out, hey, wait a minute, why am I letting the humans take this? This is free food that I'm making for myself. So you can scramble it back up, chop it in little tiny pieces. Obviously don't add salt and pepper, don't add onions, but you can add pretty much anything else. I've done some snack videos for the chickens, and I put raw garlic in it that still has the garlic oil on it, that smells really strong to us. I put raw garlic in, or cayenne pepper, or chili powder, or red pepper flakes, like really spicy stuff. Your chickens cannot really taste capsaicin, which is like the spicy factor. And that's really good for ridding them of parasites and just boosting up their immune system. So if you get a busted egg and it's fresh and it's not a store egg, but it's one of theirs, and it's not all dried out and gross, but like maybe you just cracked it by accident and you're like, gah, then give it back to the girls. Give it back to your chickens. So this is storing eggs, dealing with the eggshells. Let's talk real quick about if you want to start selling your eggs. If you're like me, I'm getting upwards of 3 eggs a day. I maybe eat 2, and we don't really bake, because if we bake, then I eat it, and I don't need to eat it. So as you can see, we have a surplus of eggs. What I recommend is if you wanted to start a little business or something like that, the going rate here in the San Antonio area is I charge $5 for a dozen. If the person brings me a carton, if they bring me their own carton, and even if it's like a store carton, then I take $1 off. So they give me a carton so I can use it for the next person, and then I charge $4 for a dozen. And I just start educating people on, look, these are so much brighter. I've done a really old video you can see here on my channel of like, here's a store-bought egg that I crack in a pan, and here's one from my girls. And you can see the difference in the color of the yolk. Like, it's amazing. These taste, when you scramble them or when you cook them, they taste like you've added butter. They're just amazing. I know what my girls are eating. I know these birds. So it's a really good connection. So if you start to have a surplus, a couple things we did is we gave a few free eggs to neighbors and to friends who might be potential customers, just like, here's a sample, basically. And I made a little business card. These are cheap because I just printed them on regular paper, but there's my logo, and I put on here information about it. The text that's hard for you to read says unwashed eggs, room temp for up to 60 days. Once washed, please refrigerate. And I have my address and my phone number and my email on there, but you guys don't get to see that. So, and I tape this on to the top of every carton. And essentially, I'm starting to take orders now because we have extra, and I keep a separate little account of, the cash or whatever, and that's what I use to buy the chicken food. So they are paying for their own food. But like I said, $4, $5 for a dozen. And that's about the rate it is at the grocery store. That's about the rate it is at farmers markets and stuff around here. I've heard in other areas of the US that it goes up to like $7 a dozen. It just depends. But just find something that's, that you feel is fair to you. So that's basically how I handle fresh chicken eggs, what you can do with them, why you can leave them on the counter, what's going on with all of that stuff with my super cute chicken decor. The last thing I was going to say is, this is something I've kind of been struggling with because of the temperature. Chickens like to sit on a lot of eggs. They will sit on 15, 20 eggs, and they like that feeling. And a group of eggs that's out like in a nesting box or in a nest is called a clutch. And so I'm trying to only collect their eggs like every 3 or 4 days so that they have that little feeling of, oh, I get to sit on a whole bunch instead of me taking them every day. The problem that you have to be careful of is if the temperature gets really, really hot, or if it gets really, really cold, you run the risk of the eggs rotting, of them being too hot, or of the eggs freezing. I've never dealt with a frozen fresh egg. I'm not sure if or how there would be a healthy, safe way for you to thaw it back out, maybe just on the counter. I don't know what that would look like when you crack it or you try to eat it. Certainly, I got a rotten egg the other day, and it was my fault. It was left out there while I was out of town, and then I left it out there for another week. And we've been here in San Antonio at 108 degrees for the last 3 days. And the shell looked kind of funny on the outside, so I should have known. It was like half of the shell was one color and half of the shell was starting to get darker, and it looked funny, but I didn't think anything of it. And when I cracked it, it was like the whole inside of the egg was mush, and it smelled terrible. It's the only rotten egg that I've ever gotten, but it's my own fault. I left them outside for too long. So that's the only other thing to be aware of if you're collecting your fresh eggs. I don't feel the urge to go grab them every day. I let the girls sit on, different ones. They've got 3 places that they can lay eggs, and I just leave them, and I kind of keep tabs on, okay, today they laid 3, and the next day now there's 7, so that means they laid 4 today, just kind of keeping tabs in my mind, checking the colors, right? Because you're paying attention to your chickens and you know who lays what color. Like, this is a good balance of all of my girls. And I could tell you, this one is Lacey, this one is Gracie, this one is Calypso, that one is Blue because it's smaller and it's darker, this one is Floxy. Like, I can tell whose they are. And just keeping tabs on it. So like I said, a couple of other things you can do is just finding that balance of how often you want to collect. You can write the date on it if you want. You can write who you think it is if you need that system. I'm past that point now where I don't need to do that. Remember, you want to store them pointy side down. And it's totally up to you on if you want to refrigerate them or not. But hopefully if you've got chickens or you're thinking about it, you found this video and now you kind of have some ideas going forward. Not just for your family, but if you want to start making your chickens pay for their own food. But I'm Sarah, the Real Simple Mama. Let me know in the comments if you have questions, if you have suggestions. Let me know, how do you store your eggs? What do you do at home? What's kind of your system for collecting them? All of that good stuff. And we will be back soon with more content. Thank you, guys.